Hello, all of you amazing people around the world. Thanks for joining me here with Dangerous Ideas. We will continue in this hour to talk about the ongoing genocide against Gazans. But as I mentioned many times yesterday, a ceasefire does not mean that those people aren't suffering immensely. I'll get into some of that. I'll get into some new evidence that many of the people killed on October 7th were the result. The deaths were the result of IDF indiscriminate fire and other tactics that were used by the IDF that caused the death of so many people. This doesn't mean Hamas didn't kill anyone, but it is not what we've been told in so many ways, and that evidence continues to come out. The sound you hear right now behind me, if you're listening to the podcast, although if you're watching, you can see, is the massive group of Jewish Voice for Peace activists who shut down, at least for a time period. I believe it was the Manhattan Bridge in New York City, my former home of 12 years, New York City. And it is beautiful to watch and see them and see their activism. And I hope many of you around the world are joining in whatever way you can, in whichever city you can, to continue the activism, to raise the alert of this ongoing genocide, which is not just about Israel. Obviously, it's about the U.S. empire, which is wholeheartedly supporting this, voting 97-0 in the Senate to support this ethnic cleansing effort. But yeah, beautiful activists around the world doing like these folks did. This is yesterday or the day before in New York City. And you know, this is one of the many tactics, one of the many tools in the toolbox that can be used is shutting down traffic, making people think about this issue, not allowing business as usual to continue. And they are chanting up with liberation, down with occupation. And Jewish Voice for Peace, as you can tell by the name, is mostly Jews. It's not exclusively Jews, but mostly Jews who are saying that that the occupation must end, the apartheid must end. And let's see, it says here at the top of the tweet that it is the Manhattan Bridge, actually, that they are shutting down here. But yeah, those type of actions go on around the world in so many places. I'm also going to bring you, as the title of this video, of this episode hints to, I'm going to bring you details on why the world is on the brink of catastrophe, global catastrophe. It's not going to shock you, but maybe some of the details will shock you. And obviously, when the world is on the brink of global catastrophe, I feel like it's something we should talk about. I don't know about you. Whether we should maybe discuss that, whether that's something that should be in our standard everyday discussions rather than ignoring it, rather than acting like it's not going to happen. And since this is, as those of you who've been tuning in every day, I'm live 4 days a week. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, if that's the right number of fingers, days a week at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. For those of you who are regulars of watching this show, you know that I've been doing an ongoing series at the end of every hour, almost every day, many days, about the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination and who it was that actually killed JFK. And you know what? I don't know if it was actually Oswald. I'm just saying, just saying, as the red laser dot slowly shows up on my forehead. So I'm going to get, at the end of this hour, I'm going to get into how, in order for it to have been a lone gunman, the odds of that and et cetera around that, the odds of certain coincidences falling into place are 1 in 167 trillion. I'm going to detail what that is. You're like, that makes no sense. That sentence you just said makes no sense. I realize that. I'm going to explain to you why. It's a 1 in 167 trillion chance that a lone gunman took out JFK. All right. So, and I don't mean on a date. So let's get to some of the details about, well, the hostage negotiations that are ongoing, the ceasefire that is ongoing But a ceasefire does not mean an end to the horror show that continues to be perpetrated against Gaza by Israel. Obviously, they don't have clean water. They don't have medical supplies. These are the ones that are still surviving. Many of them, millions, have been forced to flee south to live in tents. The rain season has apparently begun. I don't know much about my Israeli seasons, but the rain season, Palestinian seasons, the rain season has begun, which makes it all the more difficult for these refugees to live in camp cities. And of course, this is what Israel wants. They don't want people having clean water because people with clean water tend to survive longer. They don't want people having food. People who are well fed tend to survive longer because Israel is working on ethnic cleansing. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. And if you need to hear that from a Jew, then you came to the right place. But here is an interesting fact by Jeremy Scahill, The Intercept. He says the Israeli government published a list of 300 Palestinians proposed for release under the terms of the temporary truce with Hamas. 300 Palestinians that they're looking at releasing. Because, and for those of you who didn't tune in yesterday, I talked a lot about the fact that many people don't understand that Israel has 10,000 hostages, Palestinian hostages, 10,000 Palestinians that they have locked away. Many of them never convicted of anything. Many of them just locked away for reasons unknown, which to me is no different than having a hostage. They are political prisoners. And so they've got 10,000 to choose from. So Israel government published a list of 300 proposed for release and in their temporary truce with Hamas. Scahill says, I went through all 15 pages of the names, and on that list, 233 are listed as under arrest, meaning they have not been convicted or sentenced. 233 have never been convicted or sentenced out of the 300 that Israel has proposed to release if the hostage negotiations continue. That shows you the percentage of these people that are locked up in Israeli prisons and have never been convicted. It's a lot of them. It is a large percentage of them. Never been convicted of anything. Even if they had been convicted, that would still be kind of meaningless because you're a Palestinian going in front of an Israeli court that looks at you and goes, you're Arab. Of course you should be in prison. So I wanted to bring that fact to you. Also, Elon Musk was just in Israel because he's on his sorry I said anti-Semitic shit tour. And again, for those of you who don't tune in that often, I want to make it clear, Zionism is not Judaism, okay? Two separate things. You can be Christian and Zionist. In fact, there are more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are Jews in the world. The whole big globity globe, more Christian Zionists in the United States. Elon didn't say Zionists do this or that. He said Jewish communities, and then he said something like are going after white people. You know, I'm very much paraphrasing, but it was something like that. Here he said Jewish communities are pushing hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. So of course, that's A, bullshit, and B, you're grouping all Jews together for no reason. So he says it's an anti-Semitic thing. It then harms his advertising dollars. Millions of dollars of advertising is pulled from Twitter. So he goes on his little apology tour. His apology tour is to run to Israel and meet with Netanyahu so that Netanyahu can preach to him about the horrible terrorism that they faced on October 7th and how, of course, they're not perpetrating genocide. And anyway, one of the fascinating things that's said through this ridiculousness is Netanyahu, he goes, we've been seeing all these protests. We've been seeing all these protests about Israel and about, our what he would call the operation against Gaza. And he goes on to say, you notice you didn't see nearly that many protests when people were killed, civilians are killed in Syria or in Yemen. And therefore, that means that the protests are actually anti-Semitic, because why, if you just cared about innocent civilians, why would you not be protesting Syria or Yemen? Now, first of all, I would argue people have been protesting what's going on in Syria and Yemen, but there's multiple reasons that it hasn't all coalesced at once. For one thing, Israel's genocide they're perpetrating right now against Gaza is actually far more egregious. They've killed far more people in the time span, so people killed per day is far greater than either in Syria or Yemen, which are both horrible atrocities. But what Israel did in a month was kill more innocent civilians than Russia killed in Ukraine during the entire year and a half that proxy war has been going on. So just to give an example, so it is more egregious, it is more aggressive, it is more deadly, just per the rate of death and destruction. On top of that, there's the fact that this has been leading the Israeli efforts, the Israeli government's efforts, far right-wing Israeli government's efforts, and not every Israeli, let's not group them all together either. Not every Israeli believes in all this stuff. I played a clip yesterday of a man who was saying these are psychopaths and they just want power and they don't care how many people die to get it or keep it. And anyway, so the far-right Israeli government has been perpetrating ethnic cleansing for years, decades. So yes, there has been a buildup of people protesting against this so that when Israel does what it's doing right now, the more egregious, endless bombing, endless death and destruction, people are ready to go and already furious. So there's a much quicker response to such a horrific number of events. There's a much quicker response than the, kind of slowly, by comparison, unfolding death and destruction against Syria. It's also more confusing because, the U.S., most of the death and destruction in Syria was not done by U.S. bombs. U.S. has bombed Syria, but most of the death and destruction in Syria has been done by economic sanctions, by the U.S. funding and arming terrorist groups like ISIS and mainly, why can't I think of Al-Qaeda? Mainly Al-Qaeda offshoots. And so it's more confusing for protesters. The truth is that you see Al-Qaeda killing someone in Syria and people don't immediately make the connection. Oh, that's the U.S. doing that. That's the U.S. that has helped cause this. And so therefore, it is much harder to get people together and active on those type of protests. So there's a lot of reasons that Netanyahu is ignoring for why the protests now have been larger and more adamant and more passionate. And for the first time ever, you have the Democrats. This is from Gallup. This is no left-wing nutty hippie rag. For the first time ever, you have Democrats more supporting Palestine than supporting Israel. Their allegiance, their wishes for freedom and for justice are more on the side of Palestinians than for Israel. For the first time ever, Democrats across America. You've also seen great changes in those numbers with independents and with Republicans. But and that's because of all the reasons I just gave. So Netanyahu, again, spouting this type of propaganda that we're so used to hearing out of Israel. Okay, I want to get to this is a London surgeon who has said this about the massacre in Gaza. He was working in Gaza, and he has come forward in the pages of The Guardian to say that he saw the massacre unfold while working in Gaza hospitals. A London surgeon has described witnessing a massacre unfold during 43 days spent under bombardment in Gaza, saying the destruction of the Palestinian health system was a military objective of the war. The destruction, I should repeat that, the destruction of the Palestinian health system was a goal, a military objective of this war. I know many of you watching this go, well, duh, but most of the world doesn't seem to understand that. Most of the world still believes that Israel, they're trying to hit the Hamas tunnels that can never be found, and they're always one step ahead with the right tunnel. They move their tunnels is what they do. Every time Israel's about to get them, they pack up the tunnel into a bunch of suitcases and they take the tunnel into a different place, and Israel can never catch the tunnels. No, of course, Israel's found tunnels, but they haven't seemed to bring evidence of this command center, right? Massive command center that they keep saying, we keep expecting to see the control panels of the Starship Enterprise, the deck of the Starship Enterprise. We keep expecting to see that underneath these hospitals, and they have not presented that or anything like it. And so here is this doctor who spent 43 days there saying this was the goal of the military. This is a London doctor. And this type of stuff is penetrating for the first time ever, penetrating into mainstream media. And this is so important. If we're going to see change here, if we're going to see equality, if we're going to see peace, it must penetrate these horrible corporate rags that everyone reads. Sadly, I mean, I don't think people should, but this is where a large percentage of the world gets their information. So to see it penetrating there, and I brought you yesterday, I brought you the CNN actually having some clips where even they are releasing some of the true information. The clip I brought you yesterday was about how the Palestinian hostages being freed by Israel are carefully filmed in certain ways. They're kept separate. They don't have cameras near the reunions with their families because Israel does not want a lot of those videos getting out. They don't want you to be able to sympathize and empathize with these families equally. They want you to see all the Israeli families jumping for joy with those hostages being released, as you should. I don't begrudge people seeing those scenes, but they should also see all of the Palestinian families who are seeing hostages that Israel has released, and Israel kept those hostages far longer, right? They had 5,000 before October 7th locked up in their jails. They collected 5,000 more. Maybe it's more than that now. These numbers are not always day to day, so it could be 7,000 that Israel has arrested or something. I also brought to you yesterday how Israel has released almost the exact same number of people they've then arrested in the West Bank. So Israel has released 117 hostages as of yesterday. So maybe more now, but released 117 hostages. They then arrested 116 in the West Bank. So Israel is pretending to release hostages while they gather up and kidnap the same number of people from the West Bank as they're releasing, because they want to make a point that they don't actually have to release any hostages, at least not numbers-wise. So to show how, and before I forget, please, everybody, if you're enjoying this, if you think this is important, if you'd like to see this information get out to more of the world, please share this. Please click the share button, click the thumbs up. I know hundreds and thousands of you are watching right now, and most of you will not click the thumbs up button, not because you don't like the video, just because you don't take the time. And I've been there. I understand it, but it would be awesome if you could take the time, click the thumbs up, click the follow, which is free, click the subscribe, which is free, unless you want to become a member at leecamp.net, which is a separate thing. My locals page, by the way, if you're watching on Rumble, you can click the Join Lee button, red Join Lee button under the video, and become a member and support this show. And that is how this will continue. But all right, I want to get to how the Israel lobby controls some of the information, not just the information, but what the government does and why it is that you see a vote of 97-0 by the U.S. Senate to send more aid, quote unquote, weaponry, etc., to Israel, to not demand a ceasefire. This is back several days ago, pre this current ceasefire, but 97-0. How is it that you end up with it that one-sided, that biased? How is it you end up with both corporate parties exactly on the same page on this, not even a soul voting against it? And then in the House, only a handful, I don't know what the actual number was, I think it was maybe 12 or something, voted against the so-called support for Israel. And yes, part of it is simply by paying and bribing these politicians, right? Part of it, and you can view all these numbers at Open Secrets. Part of it is just by giving huge donations to these politicians in the United States. The number one on the list, by the way, for senators all time. So he's not a senator now, but he was number one on the list of receiving money from Israel lobby groups, which is AIPAC, and there's some other, NORPAC, I think is another one. There's a few others. Number one on the list of senators all time. Can you guess who it is? Anybody want to throw in some guesses? Joseph Biden, number one recipient of Israel money to politicians. Number three is something like number three on the list is Hillary Clinton, even though she wasn't in the Senate nearly as long as Biden was. But so, yes, part of it is just bribing them, right? Part of it is paying for their campaigns and they stick with it. But an important aspect of it that is not really talked about enough is the fact that they also threaten politicians who start to go against Israel, start to support BDS, even just saying things like Palestine should be free. These things that you and I may take for granted, even just saying things like that. What they do is AIPAC, these others, NORPAC, the Israel lobby groups, they will fund a candidate to kick that guy or woman out of office. And they may fund them to some crazy amount in order to try their best to get them out of office. And that aspect of it will not show up on the donations, right? Because you find out that someone lost an election. It's not, you don't often connect it to like, oh, the Israel lobby was carefully making sure that person lost their election. So the current biggest example, right, would be Rashida Tlaib. Now, they want to get her, they desperately want to get her out of office. She is one of a tiny number of politicians in the House who say free Palestine, who say that Israel is an apartheid state, who actually use those words, who voted against the quote unquote more aid to Israel. And they are doing their best to fund opposition to her and get her out of Congress, because just that little tiny handful in the House is too much for the Israel lobby, because just that tiny little bit of truth is dangerous. They, of course, got Congress to censure her just a few days ago for daring to say that Palestine should be free. But here's how bad it is. So there is another politician in Michigan. He's a wealthy businessman named, last name's Nasser. First name Baidu. Is that it? Anyway, I'll call him Nasser. Anyway, wealthy businessman. He's not running against Rashida Tlaib. He's running for the Senate in Michigan. And watch what he had to say as to what they did to try and get Rashida Tlaib out of office. The amount of money being thrown around.
I was offered $20 million to withdraw from the senatorial race and run against my friend Rashida Tlaib. The pro-Israel lobby will go to any length to remove anybody from the U.S. Congress that has any opposition to their agenda and their total, unequivocal support for Israel, good, bad, or indifferent. We need to make sure that money is not the main catalyst to get people elected, because the pro-Israel lobby is only tool, and what they use to threaten politicians is the amount of money they're going to spend against them or for them. America, let's come together and elect people who truly represent our values.
So, and he's turning it into a campaign ad moment, which whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, he was offered $20 million to try and get him to run against Rashida Tlaib. And I'm sure whoever they find to end up running against her will have been offered probably millions of dollars. Now, you might go, well, these lobbying groups they're not allowed to donate that amount of money. I mean, if you even look at the amounts that they've donated to senators long term, it's, usually in the thousands, sometimes the 100,000s, but the 20 million is way over what they would be allowed to donate. Well, that's because they can offer that amount of money as long as it doesn't have to do with specifically that group donating to a politician. So it doesn't have to be AIPAC donated to, which is all that you see in the numbers when you look up how much AIPAC is donated. AIPAC can go to various big funders, various wealthy people that they have connections with, and say, hey, we need you to fund this guy. So we're trying to get him $20 million, and they can do it. And it has nothing to do with AIPAC. Sure, the phone call's been made, and this is how our campaign finance system is rigged. Sure, AIPAC may have made the phone calls. They may have set it all up. They may have gotten the guy to run. They may have helped fund his campaign by making those phone calls, but none of that shows up on the books, because It's a wealthy investor who works with AIPAC, gets phone calls from AIPAC and goes, sure, I'll donate to that, etc. Or you can donate to their individuals can donate to their super PACs an unlimited amount and pretend to be separate from the candidate. It's not even important really how it works. The point is you can donate a limitless amount of money if it's not directly to the candidate. It's the idea that we have any kind of campaign finance regulations is a joke. It's an open joke that our rich can't fund and decide who wins all of these elections. And this is something that I think I'm the only person to talk about. I honestly have not heard almost anyone at least phrase it in this way. That yes, the candidate who spends not this first part, you've probably heard this from other people, but the candidate who spends the most, meaning has the most donations generally, the candidate who spends the most in the Senate wins about 90% of the time. The candidate who spends the most in the House wins about 80-some percent, 85% of the time, or something like that. Or maybe I have those backwards. Maybe it's 90% in the House, 85% in the Senate. So basically, the person with the most money wins most of the time. And you may look at those numbers and go, here's the part I've never heard anyone else say. You may look at those numbers and go, well, at least 15% of the time, you have the people who didn't get the most money winning the office. But here's where it gets really sneaky. The two candidates who spend the most on the election win 100% of the time. And those two candidates are always the two corporate parties who agree 100% on Israel, agree 100% on capitalism, agree 100% on doing nothing about climate crisis, agree 100% on big pharma, big ag, big oil, all of them, big banks. And so And I know some of you may go, well, often it's only two parties running. Well, that's not usually true. Usually there is a third party running. Usually there is someone else in the larger races, and they lose 100% of the time. So this means that 100% of the time, the two corporate parties have a lock on this system. They own it, and they can buy it out every single time. And I, have not heard people discuss it in that way. It's people often discuss about how bad the funding is, but the 100% number is rarely brought up. Okay, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I want to bring to you a form of protest, a form of BDS against this apartheid state that's committing genocide right now, and that is an app that has been created where you can because I recently did a video. It was my first video for Breakthrough News, an ongoing series called America Inc. The first video is out if you want to see it. And if I could say so myself, it is excellent. Oh, is it good? It's the top 11 companies that are profiting and supporting this genocide against Gaza. Top 11 companies. If you want to watch that, it's at leecamp.com. It's right at the top of the website. So leecamp.com if you want to watch that 8-minute video. But anyway, that is a segue into this app that has been created that allows you to avoid products that support Israel or are made in Israel. Let's see. The app is called the No Thanks app. Pro-Palestinian activists created it to identify products made by Israel. So you just take a photo of the product. So she's holding a Nescafe bag, and she takes a photo of it. And then the app immediately says, no thanks. And it tells you why you should be protesting that product. Seems like a great app. I have not tried it yet myself. And I also don't know if it looks like this was filmed in another country, not the United States. So I don't know if it works in all countries. I don't know if it only works on some countries, some phones. Someone in the chat is saying you cannot get it in the Apple Store. So yeah, I don't know what phones and operating systems it works with. But if you can get it, seems pretty goddamn awesome and like a great way to very conveniently avoid supporting companies that are supporting the apartheid state. Moving on, people have brought a lawsuit, and this is again about using all the different tools we have. People have brought a lawsuit that targets the Biden administration over the complicity in Gaza, in the Gaza genocide. A U.S. nonprofit has taken legal action against the Biden administration over support for Israel's deadly assault on Gaza on Monday. The Center for Constitutional Rights filed a lawsuit in Northern District of California against the president and Tony Blinken. I'm glad they threw him in there because let's face it, he's the pupilless wonder. Anthony Blinken is the one really pulling the strings. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin for failure to prevent genocide and complicity in genocide. Yeah, failure to prevent would be like the nicest thing you could say to them. That is quite a failure to prevent. I mean, these guys are actively involved in it. They have done nothing to stop this genocide that has been ongoing and the ethnic cleansing that's been ongoing for decades and decades. Yeah, like failure to prevent. But Biden's mother would put that on a Christmas card. It sounds so nice. Oh my God. Can you imagine if Biden's mother were alive? She'd be 900 years old. Plaintiffs include the human rights groups Defense for Children International Palestine, Al-Haq, Great March of Return founder, Ahmed Abu Artima, founder of the 2018 Great March of Return, Nasser Medical Complex physician, Dr. Al-Nasr, and DCIP field researcher, Mohammed Ahmed Abu Rakba. Anyway, this is, again, one of the use all the tactics you have to try and impact these people. Okay, I want to get to, I told you I'd do this, get to the evidence that, more evidence. I already covered some of it in past weeks, but more evidence that the many of the people killed on October 7th were killed by the IDF. Basically, what I've covered before this is that, and this is not defending everything Hamas did. This is not saying Hamas didn't kill any innocent people. It seems very likely they did. But it is to say that the numbers, the sheer larger numbers are, it seems, largely due to the way that the IDF behaved. And I've spoken before about the Hannibal directive that the Israeli military has, which is if hostages are taken, kill everybody. Kill the hostages, kill the people around the hostages, kill the hostage takers, and kill the innocent civilians nearby. Because the government, whoever came up with that directive, figured, well, worrying about hostages is worse for Israel, the country, than getting them back, or then killing them. So let's just kill them, and then we don't have to worry about negotiating over them. It is the doctrine of true psychopaths, and it's how Israel has behaved. Israel has behaved in the bombing of Gaza. It's how they behaved on October 7th. And so here is more evidence of that. And hilariously, this evidence was publicly broadcast on Israeli television. Now, as part of a half hour or 15 minutes or something, I watched most of it, segment on this female tank battalion and how they're heroes. And it starts off, the opening sequence is like some sort of bad 80s movie where it's like they're like running in slow motion to get in their tanks, and it's like, to the tanks, ladies, and and it really is just aggressively cheesy. So they're being touted as the heroes of October 7th because they went in and they fought away the terrorists, which is what they call them. But if you listen to a few sentences throughout this 15 or 30 minute episode, there's some key sentences where you go, wait, that's kind of the opposite of what we've been told. So here are those facts. The Gray Zone picked this apart. They said, firsthand testimony by admittedly inexperienced Israeli tank operators reveal orders to open fire upon Israeli communities when Palestinian militants breached the fences encircling Gaza on October 7th. A glowing profile, the all-female tank company by N12 News in Israel, contains admissions by the 20-year-old captain, and also listen to the ages of these people. I mean, and this goes, I'm not just saying this about Israelis, I've said this about the U.S. troops and troops around the world, soldiers around the world. I don't think 20-year-olds should be making decisions about anything. I don't trust a 20-year-old to decide how to vacuum my car. Like, I don't really. Think of it this way: if you leave a 20-year-old to dog sit for a week, you think there's like a 5% chance the dog's dead when you get back. Like 20, I remember being 20. You're not a fully formed human. Now, of course, that being said, I don't trust 40-year-olds to make these decisions either, because if they're in a position where they're making decisions over the military, Israeli military, U.S. military, any military, then that means they have fought their way up the ranks of being a sociopath, and they've gotten to the top or near the top, and that's why they're making those decisions. So I don't trust them. So the key is, don't trust anybody making these decisions. But so the glowing profile, the 20-year-old captain, identified only as Carney, says that she was ordered by a panicked soldier, her words, to open fire on homes in the Holit kibbutz, whether they contain civilians or not. This isn't a growing profile on them. 10 Israelis were killed in Holit on October 7th. No children were among the dead. Here's a quote from the captain. The soldier points and tells me, shoot there. The terrorists are in there. They're in a tank. The soldiers are in a tank. Shoot there. The terrorists are in there, in that building. The captain then says she asked, are there civilians in that building too? Her compatriot simply replies, I don't know. So just think about that part for the moment. And then the next part is orders her to just shoot a tank round into the buildings. So this tank arrives on a building. They're told there's a terrorist in there with hostages, and their immediate response is to fire tank rounds into, or be ordered to fire tank rounds into the building. And this is the Hannibal directive. This is the kill everyone around, doesn't matter, innocent civilians, just murder them all. And so she says, when the fellow soldier said, I don't know if there's civilians in there, just shoot, she recalls, I decided not to shoot, not to fire the tank round, because, quote, this is an Israeli community. Instead, she said, I fired with my machine gun at a house. So still firing at innocent civilians, buildings with innocent civilians, but choosing not to fire the tank round. Now, she is one exception where she chose not to fire the tank round. It seems like most of the other tanks just went and did fire the tank rounds, burned down the buildings. So all these charred corpses that they've laid out, that Israel's laid out, that was not Hamas burning bodies. Now, I'm not saying Hamas didn't kill anyone, but that was not Hamas burning bodies. That was the IDF going in and obliterating everything that they could. Many of the other descriptions of these events have been firefights where they started firing at Hamas and didn't care if there were civilians around. So Hamas fires back, and that ends up with everyone getting murdered. It's all a horror show, but the comments in the N12's report add to a growing body of evidence demonstrating that shelling by Israeli tanks was responsible for many of the casualties incurred at the Israeli kibbutzim. According to the soldiers interviewed, others killed by the tank company in question include supposed Palestinian militants whom they say they crushed to death with their vehicle. They talk about running them over. Brigadier General Mamia admitted that taking a band of militants in the kibbutz was a very complex task for which the young tankers were, in quote, in many ways not trained to fight. So this is another aspect of this glowing profile that you're like, wait, what? These are 20-year-olds, and apparently they were not even trained on tanks. They didn't even know what they were doing. Now, I'm not saying if you were in a society that was attacked, you wouldn't obviously throw everything kitchen sink at the people attacking you. But of course, when you live in an apartheid state, which has a concentration camp on its border, well, that's a far different scenario than just some random country, when Luxembourg's like, Belgium's coming over the hills. Very different when you have imprisoned these people for their entire lives. But that being said, reporting by the Gray Zone has revealed that many of the bodies found burned beyond recognition, I covered that, were burned by the Israeli military. The Gray Zone cited eyewitness testimony to document how the Israeli tank opened fire on the home, killing 12 Israeli non-combatants, including Leil Hitzroni, who has been a kind of poster child of Tel Aviv's international anti-Hamas propaganda campaign. So the little girl who was killed on October 7th, that they've been showing the image all over the commercials, everywhere else on the posters, she was actually killed by the IDF. Now, I'm not saying they intentionally killed her, but they went in there and just blew up and burned down everything. But to go back to the fact that these are 20-year-olds not trained on these tanks, the part of it, maybe I had the clip lined up. Oh, maybe I can show it to you. They talk about the fact that they're not trained on these tanks. That's not what they were trained for. They're now operating them. They're going into kibbutzes and just seeing if they can bomb or kill whoever they see. And she says in this segment about how they didn't know what they were doing, really. Let's see. So they're speaking Hebrew, so I'm going to try and keep it low. But we start shooting. We start with machine gun fire on the terrorists close by, then move to heavy projectiles to the ones farther from us. Did you see the hits? Yes, I see the hits. I see them falling. Hila and I were on an APV. Tal was on comms to get a status report and help the brigade commander communicate. Hila and I drove on the road 232, operating the machine gun and the APV, telling me she's spotting terrorists, open her safety so we can fire. Although I thought, oh, okay, here we go. I started a little too soon. But she says, then the other one says, this weapon system is, you need to have special training. None of us had that. In about 10 minutes, we become experts in the system. Operating it, shooting it, fixing the issues with it. You figure it out as you go, the other one says. So you have these 19, 20-year-olds who have been put on weapon systems they don't understand, sent into a situation they don't understand, and are told to just bomb and fire on everything. And that's what this was. So it's very different from the propaganda that Israel has put forward, which is our awesome IDF swooped in there, killed the bad guys, and the bad guys killed, I don't know what the total number was. Some said 1,400. Now they've lowered it to like 1,200, but whatever, over 1,000 people. When in fact, the truth is Hamas comes in, tries to take a lot of hostages, ends up killing people while taking the hostages, but many of them were kind of pinned down with hostages, and the IDF goes in and blows up and burns a lot of people alive. And many of them were 19-year-olds working on weapon systems that they didn't understand or know how to use. So very different than the Israeli propaganda. I want to bring you, if you want to be a part of the actions against this genocide, you can go to shutitdownforpalestine.org. That's shutitdownforpalestine.org with the number 4 instead of the word 4. Shutitdown4Palestine.org. And they have actions in your area. They obviously don't have every city, but they have a lot of the major cities. And this is for the actions coming up. Is it tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow, Wednesday. Thank you, James, for the donation. James says this is a 75-year UN failure. The UN is either incompetent and impotent, or they are corrupt and complicit. So thank you, James, so much for the donation, keeping this show going. But yeah, so shutitdownforpalestine.org is where you can be a part of these actions. Okay, let's get to, I'm going to have to go a little over on this episode, but let's get to how the world is on the brink of major global catastrophe. This does not have to do with Israel, although Israel is certainly a catastrophe. So we're coming up on COP28, or did COP28 just happen? I don't know. I don't actually keep track on the days when it happens because it's stupid. It has never really achieved anything. I'm not saying global meetings on climate crisis shouldn't happen, but only if they achieve things. Here's from The Guardian saying the world stands on the front line of disaster at COP28. That's the UN climate chief said that the world leaders must stop dawdling and start doing on carbon emission cuts, as rapidly rising temperatures this year have put everyone on the front line of disaster. No country could think itself immune from catastrophe. Quote, we're used to talking about protecting people on the far-flung front lines. We're now at the point where we're all on the front line, yet most governments are still strolling when they need to be sprinting. And it's not just that they're dawdling. There's a reason these countries are dawdling. There's a reason that all of these countries are continuing the use of fossil fuels. And actually, let me pause on that point for 1 second. The rest of this live stream will be at rumble.com/LeeCamp, as well as my locals page, rumble.com/LeeCamp. I'm also in a few minutes going to bring you the reason that a lone shooter killing Kennedy is a 1 in 167 trillion chance. I'm going to explain that in just a few minutes. But anyway, all the rest is free to watch at rumble.com/LeeCamp. That's rumble.com/LeeCamp. Join me at rumble.com/LeeCamp. Do I sound like a broken record? It's free to watch there. And when you get over there, hit subscribe, hit follow. And those of you on locals, keep this show going. So please do that. If you want to become a member,